Everybody, welcome to Synonym Spaces. My name is John Carvalho. I'm the CEO at Synonym, and I'll be hosting today instead of participating for the most part. The name of today's event is Lightning Limitations. The goal is to change things up and not have to have this be another like lightning hype fest, and instead have a candid conversation about lightning's shortcomings so we can address them. Today we have an amazing representation of guests from almost all the Lightning implementations. Unfortunately, Lightning Labs declined to participate, but everyone else is here. I really appreciate that you guys all agreed to join us today, and I hope we can help educate the audience and maybe have some fun. Maybe each of you want to take some time to introduce yourselves and the projects you represent. Start with Christian.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, my name is Chris. I'm probably best known for doing a PhD on all of this stuff. Essentially, the outcome that in the end was something similar to Lightning. And since I didn't want to start a new project on my own, I joined the existing effort of creating a Lightning network as part of the back then C Lightning team, nowadays Core Lightning team. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you, sir. Bastien, how about you?
Hi, I'm Bastien, T-Bast on Twitter and GitHub. I'm working at ACINQ on the Eclair implementation of Lightning and on the specification. And we're also known for Phoenix, our mobile wallet, but we're mostly a company working on the specification and node implementation Eclair, and also working on wallets as not a side thing, but not our only project.
Thank you, sir. And Matt?
Hey, I'm Matt. I've been working professionally in Bitcoin stuff since early 2011. Been doing worked on Bitcoin Core for many years. These days work on a Lightning implementation called LDK. It's kind of designed to be the most flexible in terms of implementation deployment scenarios. You can run it in a web browser, run it in WASM. You can take different pieces and run it in different places. It's a Lightning choose your own adventure game, but requires a little more developer effort than just kind of taking a Lightning node and running it. So we target developers instead of end users.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. So I want to start with topics related to scaling and commerce. We often hear Lightning proponents and startups make claims as if Lightning has solved all Bitcoin scaling problems, that it will kill a MasterCard and it's faster and cheaper than trusted centralized solutions, that the whole country of El Salvador is already demonstrating its scalability. I don't think any of these things are actually true at the moment, at least, as far as I know. So I'd like to ask, what do you think is the gap between the current state of the Lightning Network and what needs to happen to make these kinds of claims actually true? Maybe start with Matt.
Lightning does not scale that far. I think the reality is we don't know quite how far Lightning scales. We know that it scales substantially better than on-chain because we can kind of compress. I think early in the Lightning development world, people referred to it more as a way to compress transactions into one on-chain transaction rather than a network where liquidity will never leave and you'll always just stay within the network and you'll never do anything else. That narrative has shifted a little bit, and I think the reality is somewhere in between, right? The reality is that there is a lot of balancing that you'll have to do on chain. I guess the narrative is shifting back a little bit, with discussions around instead of doing splicing, instead of doing rebalancing, stuff like that, where now you are talking about chain doing as liquidity is primarily going in one direction throughout the network. You have people rebalancing by actually going to chain. So we're back to this world where we're talking about compressing transactions to get them on chain. And so, we don't know how well Lightning is going to scale in that context. Like, how many on-chain transactions does it need in order to settle a certain amount of off-chain stuff. And certainly for larger volume payments, it just doesn't work. So that's the first, just like, we don't know how far it scales. On top of that, there's a million UX issues that still need to be worked through. Lightning UX is great when it works, and when it doesn't, currently users are basically left in the dark. There's still this world where the payment didn't work. Try again, I guess, but you've already been trying for a minute, and we can't find a route or something. But we're not going to try to explain all the complexities. Like the UX still has a long ways to go in a lot of contexts. So I think that's the other end of it, is just taking it from working 99% of the time, or 95 in some cases, to 99.99% of the time, so that users don't get frustrated. I think is the next big thing.
I would definitely agree with pretty much everything you said. I think that it's a real challenge that it's like you basically have to start educating end users about technology to get them to appreciate Lightning, and that just seems backwards. Like Lightning is too complicated to impose on end users and make them have to even understand the concept of a channel, or the concept of a liquidity network, etc. Christian, do you have anything to add as far as like the scalability of Lightning and what could improve it?
Yeah, I mean, I usually don't like talking about absolutes and saying that Lightning is the last word when it comes to scalability is one such absolute word, right? We have to consider it in the context of where it came up. It does give us maybe 2 to 3 orders of magnitude better use of the limited capacity that we have on chain. Like Matt said, it is essentially a compression mechanism that allows us to make more use of what we have, instead of trying to look for big blocks and stuff like that. On the other side, I mean, scalability is just one aspect of why Lightning is interesting to us in the first place, right? There are different facets to this whole story that for me as a developer are also much more interesting as well. On top of the scalability benefits, like different privacy trade-offs. I'm not saying better, but they're definitely different. More real-time nature when it comes to payments, and of course, what I as a developer enjoy in particular is the fact that we now are free from the underlying consensus to actually experiment with stuff. Right, on the layer 2, we can move much quicker, simply because we don't have to push down all of the changes down into the blockchain itself. So I think scalability is certainly one aspect, and I think we are doing good with these 2 to 3 orders of magnitude that we gain, but it's definitely not the last word, and I think that future research is required to go beyond that, essentially. And that makes it interesting for people wanting to research these limits, right?
Once again, I totally agree, which is rare for me if people know me. Bastien, how about you? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, first of all, I fully agree with what was said by Matt and Christian, and I think we're all on the same page here. I think that whenever you talk to people actually writing a Lightning implementation, they are much more cautious talking about what Lightning can and cannot do than what people who use Lightning. People who use Lightning and don't understand all the limitations are very bold, very this is going to work and take us to the moon, and we are much more aware of all the limitations, and it can be sometimes even depressing talking to the developers working on the specification, because we're highlighting all the things that could go wrong, all the things that we need to improve, all the things that will take time to improve, sometimes need changes on Bitcoin itself. So whenever people come to me and ask me questions about Lightning and they come very enthusiastic, I tell them, okay, I think I ruined your mood. You're going to get to go away thinking that this is never going to work, but it does work. It's really great most of the time. But I'm just highlighting how much work we still have to do and how much research is needed, because some of these things we don't know yet how to do. So this is a very interesting journey, and it's great that we're able to work very quickly on it without having to have a consensus engine, as Christian said. And it's really great that we can be many teams working together and collaborating on this. So I think we're eventually gonna get there, or at least we're gonna identify new areas of research to fix the things that we cannot fix only in Lightning. But there's still a lot to do.
You're reminding me of a funny like pre-Lightning meme where like shitcoiners and Bcashers used to always make fun of the tech and say it was 18 months away, it's 18 months away, and it just keeps being 18 months away. That meme kind of fell away and disappeared, but now it feels more real like that. It's like we've all been working on Lightning stuff for years now, and it still feels like there's so much work to do, and it's just funny. It does still feel 18 months away in a way, just on the positive side of that kind of meme.
Yeah,
I'll
definitely.
segue. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. That's exactly how I've been thinking about it. Whenever people tell me, "Is it ready yet? Do you think I should go in?" I always tell them, "Oh, but just wait. We need to get that feature in before I can really recommend you to use it." But then there's also that other feature that I realize is really needed to help the security of your funds in some cases, or to help the UX of something. So I'm constantly telling people that we're not there yet. We're gonna get there, but we still need to do that thing and that thing and that thing. So we're really in that it's only 3 weeks away, but for forever and still for a long time.
I kind of have a script of questions here, but I'm going to go off script and ask one, which is like, sometimes when we're working on Lightning stuff and trying to like solve the UX issues and the technical issues and like, hide all these things from the user as appropriately as we can, we joke to ourselves at Synonym and we were like, man, you know what's going to happen? We're going to figure this all out. We're going to get it all like designed and awesome UX and get all the technology implemented and everything's going to be working. And then somebody's going to invent the next thing and it's going to be better than Lightning and it's going to not have the same liquidity and routing problems of Lightning. And we're going to start the whole thing over again. Like, do any of you guys ever feel that way or worry about that? That like, this is all going to be obsoleted. And I guess that we could segue into other related topics about like, we keep getting more payment types and there's just always a constant moving target. And with Lightning, it's certainly never really going to ossify in any meaningful way like the base layer might. Like, do you ever feel this way or worry about this kind of thing? Like what's going to happen next?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, with all of the pieces that are currently in motion and all of the new discoveries that we make every couple of weeks, essentially, we are moving goalposts all the time. So it definitely is something that can be frustrating, that we'll never get to this holistic view that we imagine at some point, because, well, this holistic view keeps changing. But that also keeps it interesting for us as developers, right? We have the chance to actually move stuff forward here, and yeah, sometimes I do get the feeling that maybe something else comes along and will sort of make us obsolete. But I do hope that the experience that we've gained from going down this path will have influenced somehow this new and better solution that might come along. Even better if it is a continuation of our work that then gets this holistic view, and this better approach is just an extension of the stuff that we did, but it might branch off at some point earlier as well. So I don't think like we're wasting effort here. That's essentially what I wanted to say.
I think that, in the history of all of the blockchain, everything that's come about, there have not really been that many fundamentally new ideas in terms of scalability design. There's been payment channel networks, which was arguably invented, which was invented certainly in the first year or two of Bitcoin's existence. There was side chains as a concept, which was arguably invented around the same time. And then you maybe kind of mix in zero knowledge proofs of sidechain designs, which various forms of were kind of discussed and similar, maybe a year or two later timescales. But certainly the ZK proof systems themselves didn't exist until much later. And that's really kind of about it. So while, yes, there are always new ideas and new designs of how to make a slightly more efficient payment channel network or a slightly better, sidechain system or ZK rollup or whatever, these are all variations and important, not to diminish that work. All of that's a lot of work to actually implement these things and come up with specific instances of them and blah, blah, blah. But they're ultimately all kind of variations of similar ideas. And so while there will be, L2 or there will be, some new, Taproot Lightning or PTLCs instead of HTLCs, it's still all kind of variations on the same thing. And to a large extent, it's just upgrading parts of the Lightning node, right? We still have all this other stuff that we do in Lightning implementations that users, the UX stays pretty similar, even if we replace chunks of the state machine or chunks of whatever. So I agree with Christian that there will be something new, but I disagree that it will be fundamentally different. And I would be somewhat surprised to see something that is so fundamentally out of left field that we aren't just building on what we have and tweaking it slightly and extending and whatever for whatever comes next. And all that to say, there will also be other scalability designs. There will be more sidechains. There will be more ZK rollups. There will be more whatever that have different trust models and have different trade-offs for scalability versus trusting someone with your money versus privacy versus whatever. But I don't think the concept of payment channel networks is really going to go away in favor of something else, just because it is going to have a little better trust model.
Yeah, I completely agree with what both of you said. And I want to stress 2 points. That first of all, everything that we learned working on Lightning, there are so many subtle parts of how to interact with Bitcoin layer that were just unknown before we started working on Lightning and discovering all the issues that one could have when trying to build on top of Bitcoin. And this will never be lost. And all the experience that we gained can be useful for any other project building any kind of replacement or concurrent to Lightning. And as Matt says, I don't think there's ever going to be a silver bullet, something that's crazy better than Lightning on all dimensions. It's always going to be different trade-offs. So of course, it's going to be great if there are different solutions with different trade-offs that different users can choose from. But I don't think there's going to be something that completely replaces Lightning and obsoletes it in the future.
Yeah, no,
I
don't think that that something completely new will come along. It will certainly fork off the of our collective experience at some point and build incremental solutions on top of that. I'm just wondering if that fork off point, going down a different path from what we've experienced so far, is going to be somewhere above what we are building right now, or will they go back to on-chain stuff and build on there? But I totally agree. I don't yet have seen anything that comes close to replacing the channels altogether.
Thanks, guys. So to go back to the script, I always considered Lightning to mainly be a commercial technology. And we've had some progress with things like BTC Pay Server and custodial payment processors like OpenNode and Strike. But Lightning isn't really widely accepted by merchants and consumers. It's not being, used in any sort of large scale way for commercial purposes. So while LN is still growing, what do you think we need to overcome to accelerate merchant and consumer adoption and using Lightning for Bitcoin commerce? Christian?
I think you probably already mentioned the big ones, right? One certainly is adoption, where we have sort of a chicken and egg problem. Usually merchants aren't really interested in integrating with the payment system if all that payment system can deliver to you is like a dozen of or so consumers that are willing to use it. That is just not a good use of your time to integrate with that. And the other problem, of course, is UX. It currently is way too hard to run a Lightning node, and we see that in many instances that that custodial solutions, which we might not be a huge fan of, are being suggested to be used instead of going more down the self-controlled way. So I think those are probably the two big ones. The one that we actually have any influence on, of course, is the user experience, and that is what we should probably concentrate our energy going forward, and we are. So I'm hopeful that that the adoption will then come, and it becomes a better trade-off for merchants to actually integrate with Lightning once there is a sufficiently large consumer base to actually are asking for Lightning payments.
Bastien,
Yeah,
I'm guessing you're mostly. Oh, go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was gonna kind of highlight that first point and double down on it. You know, that increasingly we're seeing exchanges and Cash App and consumer platforms that expose Bitcoin and integrate Lightning. So the consumer side of it's kind of there insofar as Bitcoin is there, but like ultimately the problem with all Bitcoin stuff, especially in the Western world, is users have to have a need for it. You know, users have to have a desire for censorship-resistant payment system. And I think, you know, us as Bitcoiners, we all think that this is a really important thing to exist for society. But that doesn't always mean that users actually have an immediate need for it, right? That we can think that it's very important for censorship-resistant payment technologies to exist, while also thinking that, you know, most users don't currently need this because the current payment systems work very well for them. And that's great. And it is especially true in the Western world, right, where payment systems actually do work very, very well, and generally you don't have censorship issues and blah, blah, blah. That may or may not continue to be true in the Western world. It's certainly not true outside of the Western world. But it is, you know, a thing to consider when we're talking about like, well, where are the users in Bitcoin in the West? For the, you know, I talk to my extended family and they're all just kind of like, I just don't see the need for it. And it's like, yeah, well, because you don't need it. And, you know, maybe you will one day, but you don't currently. And I think the other, there was another point I was going to make. And the other point, you know, especially when we look outside of the Western world today, ultimately that same need for a censorship-resistant payment system because your local infrastructure is shit is being filled by stablecoins. That USDC and these other systems currently, as they exist today, are functionally censorship resistant for most people. Certainly they freeze accounts regularly, you know, on a daily basis. They take money on the basis of theft and fraud and terrorist financing and whatever other reasons they have for freezing accounts. But functionally, it works really, really well. And so that is also sucking the wind to a large extent out of Bitcoin in a lot of places. Now, again, whether that continues to work or not is a very open question. So, you know, maybe, you know, so I think all of us think it's really important to keep working on Bitcoin so that there is that alternative, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get large scale adoption in the immediate term. Sorry for ranting. Christian, you have your hand up now.
Yeah, so I just wanted to double down on that point. I do believe
double down now.
Yeah, I do believe that that Bitcoin as an independent alternative to our existing payment systems is very important, even if we don't use it as a payment system at the moment. I do believe that it is essentially a game theoretic threat to existing payment providers to keep them honest and to be there once when we need it, and for that we are preparing essentially. It doesn't really matter that it isn't working perfectly at the moment. We just need to have it in our back pocket so that that the existing payment rails cannot go overboard essentially.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
And I don't think no stablecoin would be as functionally censorship resistant as they are today if it weren't for the fact that they're building in a space that is filled with actually censorship resistant payment technologies where they know they would not be able to at all compete if they weren't.
Yeah, I do think that the game theoretical threat, or this specter of a game theoretical threat of Bitcoin, is an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about that much before. I don't know, Bastien, what do you think? What do you have to say about this topic? You guys have a wallet, and you're obviously focused on the UX side. Bitcoiners love to, whenever there's a new project or new application of technology, Bitcoiners love to be able to hype it and think that if they have this kind of, if you build it, they will come attitude. But everybody here is kind of pointing out that that's not really how it works. There has to be demand before supply. And just because we all build the coolest tech and the best UX doesn't mean that this is going to change everything. How do you feel about this stuff?
I completely agree with that because, but we're still taking the approach that this is taking a long time to build, and it's still going to take a long time before we can fully say that it's ready for people to onboard. So it's good that we're doing it now that there is not yet enough demand for it, so that we can slowly scale it to the level that it would need. But the elephant in the room is that do we ever think that we will really need to scale to huge levels? I don't think we should push people to use something that doesn't meet their needs. And I'm not sure that everyone is going to need it. We're surely hoping that everyone can at least use it when they want. But I don't think everyone will use it. And I don't think it's our goal to push people into something that is just not useful for them. But we still want to make the tech ready for those people who will actually need it to be able to use it and to have it scale to the level that they need. But really, it may be an elephant in the room saying that I don't think the whole world need to use Bitcoin and Lightning, but I would be happy to see it happen, but I'm not sure it will ever happen. And that's okay. And as long as some people really are able to use it and it really solves the problem for them, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, will the whole world need to use it? Hopefully not. Like that says something very bad about the state of the world if the whole world has to use Bitcoin because it's the only alternative. But certainly at the country level, I mean, we've already seen many cases, and I think we'll continue to see going forward at the scale of individual countries and sometimes groups of countries where an entire population suddenly needs access to substantially more censorship resistant financial technologies. And there, certainly Lightning and Bitcoin needs to be able to scale to a sudden influx of an entire country getting onboarded. Hopefully not the size of India, although that's certainly sometimes been a candidate in the past. But on the scale of 100 million people or 50 million people getting onboarded very quickly, that is something that we have to figure out how to deal with, because that is something that will happen at some point, certainly either to Bitcoin or to stable coins. It's going to happen because sometimes people do need censorship resistant technology.
Well, to segue to maybe part of the solution, everyone here is also involved in this new, Bitcoin and Lightning Layer spec group that we have, where we are currently working on specs related to LSPs. A lot of the growth that we're seeing with LN is more on the custodial side, as I mentioned earlier. Even Cash App, the example you mentioned, Matt, I'm pretty sure running a custodial implementation for its users and using LDK on the server side. Do you think that LSPs are part of the solution and important in the kind of evolution of the Lightning user experience, or do you think that there's like kind of it's part of the spectrum and there's other things that people need to use, or what's your general outlook on LSPs and where they fit in?
Everything is part of the spectrum. So I mean, let's separate it. You mentioned custodials and also LSPs. Those are two very different things, and I think custodials are part of the spectrum and very important. And there's a lot of interesting projects in the custodial space. Fedimint has gotten really popular. A lot of people are excited about that, and that's really cool. There's various Lightning only custodial things that are cool too. And then there's the kind of LSP model, which is someone or a company who takes the counterparty position in your channel and provides you liquidity, possibly for a fee, probably for fees on future payments, and who kind of helps you be a Lightning node, especially if you're not kind of online all the time, which is the big issue for Lightning, of course. So yeah, I mean, I think LSPs are really critical, certainly for mobile. People want to use Lightning on mobile, and today it's terrible. Or it's bad. Certainly, you need an LSP. All of the good Lightning mobile clients today, whether it's Phoenix or Moon or whatever, use an LSP very heavily. Lean on an LSP to provide liquidity and to often do more than that, but hopefully just primarily provide liquidity. And there's definitely no way around that in order to have a good UX, I think.
I think maybe Christian would beg to differ. Sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Yeah,
I think.
Okay, I'd like to offer a historical perspective on this, because the way we started, the first mobile wallet that we developed, Eclair Mobile, was not using any LSP. We were able to directly connect and directly connect to anyone you wanted. And we wanted that first wallet to be really useful to use, to hide as much as possible details about Lightning. And we failed, obviously, because it's really a complex wallet to use. You have to understand a lot about Lightning. And developing that wallet, seeing user feedback on it, that's what made us think that Lightning was not ready yet for wallets to offer that kind of freedom. And that's where we came up with saying that we needed, at least at first in the short term, we needed to offer services on a node that would really help the UX get to a level that would be usable for users. But I'd say that we're in the evolution phase. Using this model helps us learn what works, what's useful, what helps us provide a good UX. But I'm hoping that in the longer term, once we have figured it out and see what features really people need from Lightning nodes, any node would implement them. So anyone would be potentially an LSP, and wallets could connect to anyone they want. And there wouldn't be so much of a concept of an LSP, because every Lightning node on the network would be one. But it's going to take a long time before we really converge on the features that are really necessary for your mobile wallet users. But I think that's what we're going to see. It's just that we're very early in that space. So we're still in the phase where we are experimenting with features, experimenting with UX, and we still have a lot to learn and discover.
Yeah, I don't think we really disagree, and maybe I misspoke there a little bit. Like, I think LSPs are important, but the concept of like you will always use your wallet vendor as your LSP may or may not continue to be true. And I think hopefully, I think we agree there that hopefully it does not continue to be true. That
Yes,
anyone
definitely
could provide that. Although I would also note that like the UX of onboarding of, hey, pick your LSP from this long list of LSPs and you have no context whatsoever is also a shit UX. So at some point someone's going to have to pick one, or maybe it's a marketplace or who knows what, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you don't want to confuse the user that way, and try to find a way to weight these things and let them maybe set a preference for how much they want to trust. Or I don't know, any amount of representing that does get complicated. I do think it's like a design ideal in a peer-to-peer network to have at least the possibility of every peer having every possibility. So thus, everyone should be able to be an LSP or participate automatically in an LSP paradigm. I think that's a good design goal. But I was going to mention earlier that I think I don't think that it like replaces LSPs so much as moves the relationship of them. But I was going to say give Christian a chance to talk, because he at least would say that, you know, LSPs and then a node in the wallet and for mobile is not the only solution, because he has another alternative that he works on with his Greenlight project, which is, you know, using cloud nodes as a way to, you know, represent the node for the user. And there are obviously some advantages and disadvantages to this versus an LSP pointing directly to an endpoint node in an app, because the cloud node can be online all the time, but there's, you know, privacy trade-offs, possible censorship, etc. So maybe Christian, you want to elaborate a little bit on where you think, you know, Greenlight and cloud nodes fit into this.
I didn't quite expect you to pull out Greenlight at this point, but I'll first add a couple of points that are a bit more generic. So I do think that LSPs are currently the best way of onboarding new users. We as users are on a spectrum of knowledge about the Lightning Network, and the more inclusive we are, the more helpful we are, the wider our reach into that spectrum is, especially to the lower ends of the knowledge, right? We can't expect, and we shouldn't expect, everybody to be an absolute Lightning Network expert in order to use this kind of technology. And just as like we shouldn't condemn people for choosing a custodial wallet, we should be able to offer them alternatives to having custodial systems, and maybe offering them a way into learning more about the system, and providing alternatives to LSPs, for example, as well. Something that Lisa has been working on with liquidity ads for the last couple of months was essentially a way for to get a channel marketplace going, where with the correct UX integrations, a user could pick their channel partners out of a self-announced list of potential channel peers, and we'll see how that works out. Now, people will always choose to use LSPs simply because that might be exactly what they're looking for. They want to get connected with the network quickly in a non-complicated way, and want to make use of the Lightning Network without having to bother setting up all of the infrastructure and wiring themselves into the wider network, something that an LSP can do for them essentially. So we shouldn't condemn people for using them. I think we should offer them alternatives that can give them more control, and a way to upgrade their experience at later points in time as well. And LSPs are definitely a good way into that realm, and then upgrading to liquidity ads, and then upgrading to essentially going and looking how to optimize your connectivity with the rest of the network is a natural progression that I'd like very much to see when users are choosing to learn more about the system. And if they choose not to upgrade their experience, that's fine too, right? We can't force every baker or every hairdresser to become a Lightning Network expert just to be paid for their services. It is their choice to essentially put time and effort into taking on more ownership, or being okay with the risks that they incur. And speaking of trade-offs, you mentioned Greenlight, so I will briefly give an intro to it. It is essentially our attempt to provide an alternative between the self-hosted Lightning node that I personally see as the ultimate goal that we should nudge people towards, in that they are in full control over their funds. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have the custodial nodes, where you incur the maximum risk, but also have, I'm not going to lie, the best user experience, right? It's essentially plug and play. And what we try with Greenlight is essentially take the nodes into the cloud, but still giving you full control over the funds that are on that node. And by essentially building out this spectrum of different ways of looking at not just how do we run our node, but also how do we manage our liquidity and things like that. We are proposing options to users that they then can pick up and choose what the right trade-off is. Right? It's not up to us to make decisions for the users. The users should be the ones having the ability to make those choices.
Thank you, sir. So I want to change topics to maybe a bigger elephant in the room, even though we've mentioned a few, interoperability. Christian, you and I have had some fun interactions in the past. It's kind of how we met, discussing, the role of interoperability and, competition versus cooperation and conversations like this in the past. I'll say that my perspective has, gravitated more towards cooperation than competition than it has in the past. That's probably obvious to you guys that now we're kind of trying to do more spec groups and things like this. But despite the efforts of spec and standard minded people with efforts like bolts and blips and what we're doing with the ball stuff, Lightning still has challenges when it comes to the current node and various app level implementations being interoperable. Like even when everybody is trying their hardest, it's not fully interoperable in expected ways in some cases. So like, what do you all think is the biggest challenges to overcome the interoperability problem for Lightning, and like what can we do to improve these challenges from what we do today?
I think
Christian.
Oh.
Go ahead, Bastien.
I think the main issue is that we need to be very patient because people have different roadmaps, and basically we've done all the easy things on Lightning. All the easy things that could be implemented in a month by everyone are already done. So the things that remain are much harder, involve much more complex trade-offs, basically. So it's never obvious that one of the big features that someone is pushing for is really something that everyone should spend time on. People have different roadmaps because we're just so many people and we just have so much time in a day and we don't have time to implement everything. So I think that eventually all the important things still get chosen and implemented by everyone, but it takes a lot of time and it's really hard to understand for users why some features take years to complete. But I think it just has to be that way. That's how you do decentralized development. But eventually that means that people, the market, what users need are the things that come on top and decide what gets implemented. But that's still also the main issue we may have is if some features never really get implemented by enough people, we're just never going to be able to ship them and have them interoperate with enough people. So we need things to slowly go in the same direction, but we still need to allow people to go into other directions for a while, to take their time before they converge and go back to a feature that everyone else has implemented. So it's a hard trade-off to get, but I think that's just the reality of how development on a decentralized project with various teams, with various roadmaps is. So we have to live with that.
To shill my own bags a little bit there, I mean, I obviously agree totally 100%. And I think part of the issue too, historically, you want to add Lightning to an app, you have to implement a Lightning state machine, basically. You could take, if one of the existing Lightning nodes works in your environment, you're running on a server and you want to run Core Lightning or LND, or you happen to be running in the world of Scala, and you can take Eclair and use Eclair. But if you're Electrum and you want to add Lightning in Python and run it on their platforms, and you want it to integrate tightly with the existing wallet, well, you have to actually implement the Lightning state machine. So this is what Electrum did, and they don't have, as T-Bass put it, there's of stuff going on, and even with the resources that the main kind of Lightning protocol implementations have, it still takes a while to get stuff done. So it is kind of, in the LDK view, really important that there be a way for people to add Lightning to their applications without having to dedicate 2, 3, 4, 5 engineers full time to implementing all of the stuff that people want to see at the protocol level of Lightning. There's just so many different things that we want to add, that we all have to implement and have to be broadly supported in order for them to be broadly usable for, even the one implementation that might be really, really desperate to get this feature in. And so certainly that's kind of the pitch of LDK, is kind of like to solve that problem by saying, we're going to do all the hard work for you. We've got, now 7 full-time engineers building all this stuff for LDK, and you can just take this and run with it. And certainly, Greenlight's a little different model. It's more of a cloud-hosted Lightning node, and has a lot of other trade-offs that it makes, but has kind of a similar pitch of like, add Lightning without having to do the work of adding Lightning. That has historically been a major barrier to people being able to write a Lightning implementation and then actually keep it maintained.
Exactly. The goal of all of this is essentially to widen the scope of where Lightning becomes applicable. And back to the specification effort. That is slow on purpose in a certain sense, right? It takes time for proposals to emerge, for different variants to be experimented with, for every single implementation to give their feedback, because all of the implementations come from different application backgrounds, essentially, right? And different requirements. And only when we've collected all of the requirements, made sure that the proposals actually work in different settings, only then can we say, yes, this is a good proposal and we should go ahead with it. Why am I saying it is on purpose? It prevents us essentially from becoming myopic, concentrating only on one use case, potentially neglecting some other use cases where we now made it impossible for Lightning to be used for mobile, for example, if we didn't have anybody essentially being the representative for mobile development. And so this slow progress, as frustrating as it sometimes is, and trust me, I've spent quite a bit of time shouting at people because I was frustrated due to the lack of progress. But I do believe that it is something that keeps us as specification writers honest, and it makes sure that we have considered all of the different aspects when proposing things, and we have made the best choice when it comes to proposal, because we have considered all of the different variants. And when I look at the wider crypto ecosystem, I am quite happy with how solid and stable our progress has been. When I look at knee-jerk reactions that have resulted in thefts and stuff like that, so this slow progress is what ensures that we basically take everybody into consideration, and also keeps us safe from making some knee-jerk reaction that we'd regret otherwise.
Do you think there's a place and a role to play for the opposite view, where basically, like, we've, as an example, like there are some proponents for certain like payment types. For example, like there was a little bit of tension about Bolt 12 and offers, Bolt 11 being the standard, and other people having, there's a lot of payment types for Lightning. There's key send and AMP, and there's just always going to be more things. Do you think there's a role for like some of the people and some of the features moving independently without a sort of soft consensus or spec process to try to act as the other side of the Overton window or something, and pull the spec forward based off of like either be that party or project is really confident that their proposal should be a consensus thing, yet it isn't, or that there is an immediate demand that is like pulling this non-specified feature forward faster than a normal feature would be kind of specified and agreed upon? Like, do you think there's a role for this, and that's something, that kind of dynamic is also important?
It essentially depends on which part of the system we are talking about. Especially when it comes to AMP versus MPP, this is something where we can still collaborate and be interoperable despite sort of not having the end-to-end system be identical and agreed upon by everybody. And this goes back to the experimentation that I was talking about before. We have this freedom of essentially trying out different trade-offs and trying out different variants, and then essentially coming back to the table, sharing our experiences, and trying to find if we can somehow reconsolidate them into one aspect. There are other parts where this cohesion becomes more important. When we talk, for example, about HTLCs versus PTLCs, we can't mix them. And essentially, we then require a substantial part of the network to have support for a certain part that has this multi-hop nature, for example. Whereas end-to-end things like AMP are easier. Bolt 12, seeing that you mentioned this case specifically, by itself is not something that everybody has to agree on, but the onion messages that enable Bolt 12 would be. And so currently we are in a discussion phase for these onion messages, simply because Bolt 12 relies on the ability to send messages over the Lightning Network, where we currently don't have that mechanism, except if you piggyback on HTLCs.
I'd push back on that a little bit. Yes, it is, certainly we want to experiment. We want to have people free to experiment, and yes, for end-to-end things and Lightning, people can run whatever they want, and the ends can do whatever they want. But at the end of the day, we do still want to have a cohesive Lightning user experience, right? We do still want it to be the case that if you get a Lightning QR code from Cash App, that anyone can pay that. It is rather important for everyone to be able to generate, these QR codes that have the features that they want, that anyone can pay. And if everyone's off creating their own payment system and experimenting with their own payment systems and shipping it into prod, then we don't have that, and all of a sudden we get this fragmented user experience, and people are like, well, I scanned the QR code, it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? And they're trying to contact support, and everything just kind of falls apart. Insofar as we can do, so there's a big difference between, I built a thing, look how awesome it is, I shipped a beta or an alpha, and I have some people testing it, and it's working really well, now can everyone else join me and implement it? And I have this thing, I shipped it into prod, now I have a bunch of users who are running around creating support tickets for everyone else who has a Lightning implementation, complaining that the QR codes that they're generating aren't valid, even though there's no specification for it. Those are two very, very different things. So while experimentation is really important to enable, and we want to make sure that you can experiment, there's also a kind of, and certainly, we can't do anything to stop anyone. So it's more kind of a social responsibility question of, people who are developing these applications and shipping them should be considerate of other developers' time and of kind of the end user experience of the whole system, of the system as a whole, and the Lightning Network totally, and not just kind of users who want to pay other users using the same application. So there just has to be some kind of backward.
We kind of run into the problem regardless, though, right? Because, like, as Christian mentioned, with like PTLC versus HTLC, we're all opting. That's going to be opting into that problem, because there will be fragmentation. Yeah. There will be apps that don't support one or the other.
There will be, but we do want to minimize that as much as possible. And there's a big difference between Like, we do this occasionally and very deliberately as a large community, and everyone goes off and does it on their own on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there is obviously a tension between everybody going in lockstep, and on the other hand, we have experimentation that we want to have, essentially proving that that the proposals that we are implementing are workable before they become parts of the spec. And in Core Lightning, we have always tried to be very, very explicit about the different stages of these things. Bolt 12, liquidity adds, and all of that that is still all gated by feature flags. Now, have users gotten overexcited and essentially opened tickets on other implementations? Probably. But we've tried to avoid as much as possible to make an experimental feature appear as if it is part of the core functionality set that everybody should be reliant on, like other implementations have.
Bastien, you have anything to add?
No, I fully agree with that. I think that just really summarizes it well, so I don't have anything else to add.
All right, thank you all. Next topic, privacy. Several people on Twitter wanted me to bring this up, and I have some questions around it anyway, so let's see if we can get some conversation going.
We're currently
the regulatory environment. Well, I'll ease you into that, Matt. The regulatory environment seems to be getting, heated, and they're having these concepts of like an unhosted wallet, VASPs, money service business, KYC, AML, FATF, flight rules, all this stuff. And I have been, personally trying to work on going through the legal, requirements for creating terms and conditions for our upcoming wallet app, which has an LDK node in it, and teaching lawyers about all of the intricacies of this design and in LSP and all this stuff with Blocktank. And what I'm seeing is that, I feel like there are vulnerabilities in Lightning's design to being portrayed in ways that are different than on-chain Bitcoin, and maybe a little more susceptible to being portrayed as something that could or should be censored by certain parties, whether they be lawyers influencing, decisions out of fear of being seen a certain way by regulators or the law, or actual regulators and government representatives becoming more familiar with how Lightning actually works as a peer-to-peer network, and trying to themselves think of ways they think it should be censored or monitored or included in compliance. So, each of you, do you see any ways that you think Lightning might actually be vulnerable to regulation and censorship and compliance requirements for whether it be users, merchants, developers, businesses, etc.? And do you have any ideas about how we can circumvent or prevent or mitigate these risks?
Yeah, I think at least with respect to regulation, the good news is we're building on top of something that's we believe to be fairly truly censorship resistant, right? And you can build, and the great thing about Lightning is it is cross-border, and I've had these conversations with regulators and lobbyists where they're like, wow, we should add this rule, and Node should have to do this and that, and the response I give is just, yeah, I mean, you can make that the rule in your country, but people are just going to run nodes elsewhere, and then all of a sudden any rules you wanted to apply are out the window, and people are just going to ignore you. So that's not helpful. There is, of course, the reality of where developers live and where the people who are trying to write applications built on Lightning live. Luckily, we've had this conversation with some European regulators where they're like, well, we're gonna do this and that, and it's like, yeah, well, it doesn't really matter, because here in the United States, we have this thing called the First Amendment, and at least in California and that circuit, writing software is First Amendment protected speech, and so there's actually under at least partial United States current precedent, you can't really say anything about what people write in their software. And as long as it doesn't require some kind of hosted solution, and this gets back to any node can be an LSP conversation, or maybe some external LSP that's not the same kind of node that is the wallet vendor, then, well, it's First Amendment protected speech to write software. And so I'm less worried about Lightning privacy from a regulatory angle. I am very worried about Lightning privacy from a technological angle, because the current state of the Lightning Network is very, 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 very bad for privacy. We have all these ideals of onion routing and private routing and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, routing tends to take very short paths. It tends to take paths through somewhat large nodes, depending on the specific routing algorithm you use. There's no strong cross-hop correlation because we use payment hashes and not PTLCs. You can discover node balances relatively trivially with probing, very, very accurately today. And this allows you to monitor for payment flows. And we see a lot of probing in the network. So we know some people are doing this, whether it's to monitor for payment flows or whether it's purely just to know where liquidity is in the network for their own routing. We don't know, but presumably some people are maybe trying to monitor for payment flows. And the reality is they could probably detect them if they wanted to. So I think, we have a lot of work to do. Oh, and on top of that, recipients reveal where they are in the network when they want to receive payments. So we need blinded paths. At least that one's fixable. And we know how to fix that with blinded paths. So that one's getting fixed, and hopefully, as Bolt 12 gets deployed, you'll have some more receiver level privacy. But how do you do good private routing algorithms that are actually still result in robust payments? We need academic research here. Like we don't really know how to do this. How do you reduce cross-hop correlation? Okay, well, we need PTLCs based on Taproot. Great, we can finally do that. That's going to take some time to deploy, but we can start working on it. But then you still have CLTV correlation and other strong correlations that academic research has showed may be sufficient to figure out where a payment is coming from and where it's going. And so we need both fundamental research. We have a lot of things we know we can do that we need to do, but we also need fundamental research to get to the point where we think Lightning is private. And on top of that, a lot of the things where we want to make Lightning private are in tension with making Lightning robust. We need payments to randomly fail, maybe, to reduce the effect of probing. We may need to charge for upfront fees for payments, which may increase fees across the network, which people don't like. And on top of that, all of these things may or may not work. So we need more academic research to see whether they will work. We're still a long ways from Lightning being materially private. So there's a lot to be done.
So as mentioned in the first answer, we developers are pretty good at poking holes into our own baby. And I think privacy is the perfect venue for that. We do know pretty well where the skeletons are buried, and while I do agree that there is quite a substantial way to go for privacy to be as good as it should be, I do think that it already has a substantial advantage over on-chain privacy, for example, simply by not leaving a permanent trace on the blockchain. When it comes to regulation, I'm obviously not a lawyer. I'm just a nerd that likes talking tech. So I'll leave it at a short sort of view that I have is that I can't give out information that I don't have. I can't be made culpable for things that I didn't know were criminal. So the better we make it, the privacy.
You may want to check with a lawyer, because you were definitely culpable for things you did not know were criminal in almost every country in the world.
Sure.
That's not how that works.
It should be, but okay. No, I do want to get privacy as good as it gets, simply because I like the plausible deniability of not being involved or not being a party in a payment. And for that, yes, I do agree that we definitely need more academic research into these topics. And if anybody is looking for a master thesis or a PhD thesis, I do have a couple of professors that would love to take you up on that.
And we have like 10 different fascinating research problems for you to work on. So
only 10?
Okay, probably more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to stress that I think that everyone agrees with that, but just to highlight it further, privacy is always going to be a spectrum. It's not a on or off switch. There's never going to be perfect privacy. So we'll always be able to do better on some trade-offs or to do worse. So we're always going to want to improve, but we will always have to choose how much privacy we gain without degrading other important stuff. So this is always going to be both. Once we have the research done, then it's always going to be an engineering decision to choose how much you let the user configure that degree of I'm pulling into one direction and accepting other trade-offs in another direction. So I don't think people should expect to ever have something that would be perfect privacy. That just doesn't exist.
All right. Anyone else have anything to add on the privacy topic? Maybe any positive notes or favorite privacy projects at the moment?
Blinded path, everyone, please. Yes.
All right. Well, then let's move on to the next topic, which is, I don't know what to call it, like alternative Lightning use cases. For example, more recently hot topic, and one I've been kind of involved with in the past as well, is the concept of using the Lightning Network for tokens. And there are various designs for this, where you have something like Omnibolt, which is trying to make an alternative asset network for each token, and having native tokens be in channels. And then Taro, which is, at least in its default design, trying to use Lightning more like a liquidity rail, where they're doing conversion, from the token into Lightning at the edge nodes. What do each of you think about using Lightning for tokens, or like Taro to route tokens? Will your implementations, intend on supporting any token technology in the future?
I think, first of all, to kind of mention what I mentioned before, or to point to what I mentioned before, a lot of people these days has become kind of a meme in the Bitcoin community to say that well, stablecoins aren't in competition with Bitcoin, and we're gonna they're different, and we're gonna support both and whatever. And I think we should support both, but they're absolutely 100% in competition. Like the practical use cases that people have for Bitcoin in most of the world, maybe not the Western world, but most of the world, are something where people just need censorship resistant financial technology, and they'd probably rather use stable coins because the dollar has a better brand than Bitcoin. No matter what we do, it does. And so, if they're going to probably prefer that over Bitcoin. And so, in some sense, for the domain of censorship resistant financial technologies, they are in competition. Now, it is incumbent upon us, the Bitcoin community, to communicate to users the differences. While stablecoins are in practice usually de facto censorship resistant, they are not kind of universally censorship resistant. And that's where we see a lot of the regulatory discussion going right now, is how do we regulate stablecoins? What's the appropriate regulation for stablecoins? And how broad of the user base is actually impacted by regular censorship and whatnot that happens on stablecoins today, right? You see this on a weekly, if not daily basis. Various USDC accounts get frozen. That's just normal course of business for a stablecoin. As for doing it in Lightning, I think obviously providing users access to both is something that users want. How you communicate the differences is really complicated. How do you communicate to a user? Well, here's the stablecoin. In practice, it's probably censorship resistant, but actually, if you end up on a sanctions list or your name looks the same as something on a sanctions list or you're named Mohammed, then at some point your funds are going to get frozen and you're not going to be able to use this stablecoin anymore. It's a really hard thing to communicate in the UX, and like you have to choose one or the other and blah blah blah. But there's a lot of different systems. You mentioned Taro. There's also DLCs. There's some other project I saw recently that just uses straight up trusting of exchanges to do stable coins. Well, Taro, depending on how you actually deploy it, but to do stable coins kind of at the edges, right, where you have a channel with a market maker in the case of Taro, or a channel with someone who's watching an oracle in the case of DLCs, where you have some stablecoin balance or some balance that's hedged against Bitcoin, or maybe one-to-one hedge, so it's effectively a dollar synthetic in the case of DLCs. And then you can pay someone in Bitcoin, and then whether they receive Bitcoin or dollars or whatever they want on the other end is also up to whether or not they're using one of these systems. And so these designs are really awesome. They do, of course, have some amount of, in the case of Taro, you have this quote unquote free option problem. Well, it's either a free option or you could actually just price the option and charge the user the fee for whatever the option costs. So that's something that adds to the cost of the users, the fees of users. Same goes for DLCs. You have a broader marketplace. You don't have to trust a counterparty who's a market maker, but you do have to have a channel with someone who's willing to take to be a market maker. And so again, there you have a little more fees. And ultimately, these actions are going to be probably substantially more regulated, and probably, there are trust elements in that network that are possibly going to be regulated. DLCs may be a little harder. Maybe the Oracle stuff is a little more protected, and it's harder to figure out where in that network to be regulated. But certainly Taro and USDC and all these other things are going to become heavily regulated, and we see the beginnings of that in DC already. And so what does that mean for Bitcoin? What does this mean for users of these systems? Is censorship going to be an issue on these networks? And can you build a great UX? Taro and a lot of these things have all of the problems with Lightning, and then on top you have problems with stablecoins. So on top of it, you get potential for future regulation. You get this option has to be priced, so the fees might be higher. You get, you have to have a market maker, so now your LSP has to also be a market maker, which is a whole nother bag of complexity. There's just a lot more things going on there. And so whether you can build a good UX there is, it's going to be even harder than building a good UX on Lightning, which is already hard. And you have all the same liquidity questions and whatnot. So I'm excited people are trying these things, but I think there's just so many open questions. There's so many open questions with Lightning, and this just adds more open questions that still need to be resolved. That was long and rambling, and the coffee's finally kicking in, so I apologize for that.
No, I think you probably hit the nail on its head. What I personally care about is Bitcoin and making it work as a payment system, because that is the goal that I set out all these years ago. And as long as some other constructions that might happen to use the Lightning Network can be built on top of it. That's fine, as long as that complexity doesn't bleed into our already really complex system. We continuously find new things to research in Lightning without all of that, all of the complexity of assets and stable coins and stuff like that. And I would hate for that complexity to be pushed into our work when really our interest is making Bitcoin work as a payment system. That's probably it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you both said, and just from our point of view, we're excited that people are trying it out, but we won't invest time into it because there's already so much things we have to do for Lightning to work reliably and to improve that it's going to keep us occupied for the next at least few years. So we'll see if we have to dive into these other things as well at some point, but right now this is really not our focus.
All right, thanks, guys. Another somewhat related question as far as like alternative Lightning use cases. There are several like Lightning Network oriented startups and projects that try to hack in like web and communication services that are unrelated to Bitcoin payments, like chat and identity use cases and things like this. What do you think about the concept of multi-purposing Lightning and the protocol to make like Lightning the next internet, or these kinds of concepts that I've mentioned?
Do it in parallel, not in. Certainly, once you're talking about a lot of bandwidth, we're talking about onion messages, and we have all these discussions about denial of service considerations and rate limiting and blah blah blah, and all the discussions. When we've talked about concrete ways to do denial of service limitations, a lot of really simple stuff you can do works really, really well, as long as the amount of bandwidth available is like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more than the amount of bandwidth users actually want to use. And that's really easy to make work if we're talking about, oh, I have to send 3 onion messages per payment or 5 onion messages per payment or something like that. It's really easy to talk about like, wow, we can just massively over provision the capacity because people actually have a few megabits per second of internet available. That's not really a problem. And then it works really robustly, and we can do these really naive denial of service resistance techniques, and then like we get a great network and it works. The second people start trying to send actually material bandwidth over onion messages, suddenly, well, someone's going to denial of service something and your application is going to stop working. So, you can do it, but if you do it, you take that risk and your application is going to fail or fall flat on its face when something goes slightly wrong. So probably don't do it. Probably use Tor. There are plenty of ways you can build an identical UX, or you can build the exact same application without relying on doing these kinds of things within the Lightning Network. Doing it within the Lightning Network is cool, but not really better. You can just use Tor and like take that as a dependency instead, and at least there's more bandwidth available in Tor, and they're working on solving these denial of service problems in useful ways that people working on the Lightning Network will probably never work on, because we have our own problems to fix. And if you show up and you say like, well, I've been sending lots of data over onion messages and the network got DOS'd and suddenly my application broke, probably the response you're going to get is, that sucks. But I don't think anyone's going to try to fix that for you.
I think I probably can repeat just my previous question answer, right? If as long as it doesn't impact the use of Lightning as a payment system for Bitcoin, I don't really care all that much. As soon as it does have an impact, please don't do it. Can we prevent you from doing it? No, but please be respectful of why people choose to join the network in the first place, and that in most cases was because they were interested in a payment system based on on Bitcoin, and not to route your anime porn or whatever.
I agree 100% with what was said, because I think people tend to forget that making something like Lightning that lets you pay anyone in the world instantly, reliably, with quite good privacy, low fees, and is already amazing. So if whatever you're doing is going to make that experience worse, I think that's hurting the network. And I don't think the network can support both being a good payment system and doing all these other things on top.
Thanks. So I have one final question, and if anyone wants to queue up, if you have a good question for these guys, I'll take 2 or 3 questions after this. But for my final question, I just want to give each of you a chance to, if there's a pet project or pet limitation or pet peeve or just something that we haven't brought up that you wish that we did bring up today, now's your chance to kind of, put it on stage and discuss if there's actually another aspect of Lightning that you think is a limitation or solves a limitation that we haven't discussed already.
Yeah, I have a long list. Can I have like 4? Is that allowed?
Go for it, man.
You can have mine.
I mentioned privacy. Privacy is really bad. We have so much work to get done there. We need to be working more on there than maybe we are, although there is a lot of work going on there. Also offline receive. Lightning, whether it's using LDK on a mobile phone or whether it's using Greenlight with the verified Lightning signer project on a mobile phone, ultimately you have a lot of complexity with, the mobile phone has to do state synchronization and has to be online to actually receive payments or send payments or forward payments or do whatever. And you have a lot of complexity there, not to mention you have to have some way of doing this in a way, some clients today will like forward the payment and then it'll sit there and hold liquidity through the Lightning network until the phone comes online. And, if you're driving down the freeway, maybe you don't have service for an hour and suddenly you're kind of denial of service attacking the Lightning network. That there's work to be done there, and a lot of work to be done there, and a lot of work to be done on, making good Lightning mobile reliable payments. A lot of payment failures that people see on the Lightning network today are just because the phone was offline. That's really confusing for users of Lightning. So that's something that needs a lot of work. Also, there's a lot of, we didn't touch on anchors and package relay and Bitcoin Core, and the security model of Lightning today. Don't open channels with people you don't at least kind of trust not to put a lot of effort into stealing your money, because they definitely can. And that's just the state of Lightning today. We've got anchor work going on. Most Lightning implementations now support it and use it or maybe use it, but without package relay and Bitcoin Core, which is coming. And shout out to Gloria, who's been working tirelessly on it for a year or two now. It's still not sufficient. There's still attacks you can do, and maybe even once we get it, there might still be stuff we discover. It turns out this stuff is really hard, so just be aware of this when you're opening channels with randos you don't know. Strongly not recommended, at least not for amounts of money you don't want to lose. Yeah, there's probably more, but that's the beginning of the list.
Yeah, I want to highlight mostly that last point, fund safety. Basically, whenever you put funds in a Lightning channel, we want that to be safe against malicious actors. And right now there are many issues, many situations where it may not be as safe as we'd like. And it's hard because to fix that, we need to change or at least improve how Bitcoin deals with fees at the on-chain layer, give us more flexibility to do slightly different designs. So this is work that takes a long time, that needs a lot of research, even when the research will be done and we have solutions, will take a long time to get adoption at the Bitcoin layer. So this is really important, and I hope more people work on that.
Yeah, I guess I'll add my own pet peeve, and I think we've talked extensively about it and Matt already mentioned it. Essentially, UX is pretty bad at the moment. We need more research into how to make all of this palpable for users. And I think that there are a couple of things that are in the pipeline that might actually be a huge win for this. I'll just name Matt's offline receive proposal. I'm really excited about that one, and hoping that more proposals like this come in the future to improve the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited about that stuff too. We're not researchers or academics in the sense that we can solve these big problems that have been mentioned, but we are working on UX, ourselves a lot, and we are also we have some side projects, top secret projects that we're hoping to share later in the year about improving Lightning privacy as well. So we're doing our part as best we can, but as everyone here mentioned, there's plenty of work to do and plenty of projects and code that needs to be written and research that needs to be done to address all of the limitations that we've mentioned here today. Right now, I'm going to give a couple people a chance to ask a question. So let's see what they got. Bringing up Sharp. Sharp, you can unmute if you want to ask your question.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much. Quick question from Matt. When John asked about alternative use cases, you mentioned something called the free option problem. I've never heard of that. What is that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's just a reference to Lightning payments. You send it, and then it has some amount of time during which it could either complete or could fail. And so if you're sending Taro or some other, if you're sending, whether it's DLC, Taro, what have you, you're sending dollars, you have an exchange rate risk during that time period where the payment could either succeed or fail. And that time period is potentially on the order of an hour or two, maybe even longer. And during that time period, for example, you could take your Taro tokens or your DLC US dollar denominated balance or whatever, send it out in a payment and hold that payment, send that payment to yourself at some other node and hold that payment for an hour. And during that time, you could watch the exchange rate and either complete the payment and make money if the exchange rate moved in your favor, or fail the payment if the exchange rate moved against you. And so whoever's doing that translation from US dollars to Bitcoin or back at that edge is taking on that risk that you're performing this during that payment. And you could price this. So there's normal, Wall Street is very good at pricing the cost of this, called an option, right? Because you have the option to either buy Bitcoin or not during that time period. So Wall Street knows how to price this. You can actually assign a cost to it. You can say the expected cost of this option is X, and you can just charge everyone that cost up front. And you can say, I'm going to charge you the option, but it might be volatility on Bitcoin can be high during some periods, and so that would be problematic. So, it's unclear how much that option would cost in practice for users if you priced it, or if you don't price it and you assume users aren't performing this attack. Do you open yourself up to losing money on the exchange rate risk?
Thanks very much.
Thanks, man. I'm going to bring up Terrence now. He has a question. I don't know. Looks like Terrence disappeared. Anyone else have a question? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Terrence. Unmute yourself.
Sure. So, hey, good to see you, Matt, again. I have a question about lawyers getting involved with the legal issues you're talking about. What's a good way for someone who's an attorney or has a legal background to help with privacy issues you were talking about?
Lobby. I think right now the fight is less in front of courts and is more in front of regulators. In the U.S., we have a number of good institutions who work on these issues. Coin Center is, I guess, probably the premier one. There's also was a blockchain something, I forget. But a number of these lobbying groups are focused on the issues of whether you can legally issue a token that may or may not be a security and blah, 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 blah. We don't care about that as Bitcoiners. We care about the ability to, actually pay people without having tax reporting obligations, without having, KYC reporting obligations, all these issues, and whether that and the nuance of exactly how these rules are applied and how they're constructed is something that's being hashed out both today in DC and in Brussels and at FATF and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's these places that need resources, especially Brussels. In DC, we have a lot of resources of people who are explaining these issues. In Brussels, very much less. We see a lot of regulators in Brussels who just do not understand these issues. They don't understand the technologies. And, it's not like we're going to lobby to say, to try to influence policymakers to do one thing or another that may be bad. In a lot of cases, especially for someone like Coin Center, it's just explaining what the issue actually is, because a lot of regulators don't understand these systems, or they've been given a very confused understanding of Bitcoin because someone explained cryptocurrency broadly to them. And obviously, these things can be very different. A lot of cryptocurrency systems are very fundamentally different systems. So just explaining these things to regulators, explaining the legal contours of what they can or should do. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been stuck talking to regulators trying to explain some things now and again. But any resources that can go into these kinds of issues, I think would be really great. Both at a national and state level. There is state level regulation that's come up from time to time. And at a state level, it's very easy. In general, you can show up and actually just walk in and talk to your state representative in many cases, and actually just have a conversation with them. And that can be something that's very easy for anyone to do, but especially someone with a legal background who has a little deeper understanding of how to structure these kinds of things. And I would encourage anyone to do this, to send an email to your state representative and set up a meeting and just go show up and have a conversation with them and explain the issues, explain how these systems work, explain the advantages of these systems, be honest, be open. And in a lot of cases that moves the needle very significantly, because helping regulators understand what they're regulating is surprisingly something that doesn't often happen.
I want to offer an alternative answer. I've been deep in this for a little while now, dealing with lawyers from different firms, from different countries, and I've spoken with ones in the past as well when I was at BitRefill and through other companies, and I'm hesitant, one, just in general, to pursue regulators and pursue lobbying and things like this, because I feel like it's a double-edged sword and it often does more harm than good. But I don't want to dig into that so much as say my general assessment is I don't actually believe there is a lawyer on this earth that fully understands the Lightning Network well enough to be teaching somebody about it and what to do about it in the case of educating a regulator. Lightning is very difficult to learn. Bitcoin is very difficult to learn. For a lawyer to kind of really dig in and know the interactions, if you want to help, do that. Become an expert in Lightning. Take a year or two to become expert in it, whether that be learning how to deal with the code or learning how to, asking a lot of questions of people that implement it, listening to tons of podcasts and reading lots of articles. I don't know what the best method is, but don't tell anybody anything until you become expert, and you become expert in a way that like you see where people's biases are and where the narratives are and where the truth is between how Lightning works and what to do about it. Then at that point, I would still say, fuck the regulators. Instead, go to Bitcoiners, go to people that are building Lightning stuff, go to people that are innovating in Lightning, and tell them where the weak points are and what regulators might focus on as weak points and attack points, and help the builders mitigate any ability that regulators have to censor, to throw compliance at them. Educate Bitcoiners about the law and about regulators, so that way we can avoid them having any chance of having any influence over us at all. That would be how I would look at it.
So I personally have to disagree with that point. I do think that that we as Bitcoiners often do attribute malice to regulators, to lawyers, to whoever we happen to dislike. But often those decisions come out of a place of misunderstanding or lack of understanding. And we as Bitcoiners, as subject matter experts, should be helping them fill in the gaps that they're obviously missing, and helping them understand where this regulation falls apart. I'm not saying we shouldn't also protect ourselves against by limiting the points where regulation can attack us. For example, by increasing privacy, by increasing plausible deniability, and so on. But I do think that that collaborating and working with regulators to make sure that regulation actually matches our understanding of how things should work is very important. We do live in a society, and regulation is how we regulate that co-living. We can't just sidestep it. From personal experience, I was lucky enough to be the technical advisor for some regulations that were passed a couple of years ago here in Switzerland. And in my experience, the lawyers in the room actually writing the regulation were really open to feedback. And when I pointed out things that they gotten wrong, for example, they tried to define decentralization. That's not possible for a lawyer to do. So I basically was there to be their punching bag, to help them understand where their arguments fall apart, and make sure that they have a system of regulation that is open, that is permissive, and does apply protections where needed. And I still cherish those memories, and I would do it again anytime.
You need look no further than the difference between the tone in DC and the tone in Brussels to see the impact that not even outright lobbying, but just simply educating lawmakers can have. The tone in DC continues to be one of, maybe regulators aren't super aligned with us, and they're, think that some things need to be drawn in, and they think some things in the cryptocurrency space have gone too far. But the level of understanding that you see from lawmakers, and the level that you see lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, both Democrats and Republicans, talking about how these things are important and we shouldn't kill them off, and they have some societal value, even when their constituents are calling them and saying like, kill Bitcoin, Bitcoin's the devil, blah blah blah. And many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are standing up and saying no, there is some value. And then you look at Brussels, and you just see almost none of that. There are a handful of lawmakers in Brussels that understand what's going on, more technical-minded lawmakers, but very few. And there are many technical-minded lawmakers in Brussels who just openly shit on cryptocurrency broadly, and Bitcoin specifically even more so. And I think you can attribute so much of that to the work that Coin Center and others have done over the years, just getting in front of lawmakers in advance of all of these fights and saying, here's what Bitcoin is, here's what Bitcoin's not, and here's why it has some value for society, and here's why it's important. And just having that conversation moves the needle very substantially. It may not get you all of what you want, and regulators might still say like, yeah, but we need to do blah blah blah, and maybe that's not what we want. But if you start from a position of Bitcoin has societal value and it's interesting and it's useful and we should protect it, instead of starting from a position of Bitcoin is boiling the oceans and it has no societal value because you should be using Cash App or Venmo or Swift or whatever instead, it's just a fundamentally different conversation.
Thank you, guys. Let's have a question here by Vivek. How you doing, Vivek?
Doing well, John. Thanks for having me. I was curious where one can find the most up-to-date information regarding offline payments. I thought that was particularly relevant because we're discussing Lightning's limitations.
I think the answer is post Onion messages. People will be working on it. I think there. Sadly, I'm only aware of, in fact, one proposal to do this. This is a mild proposal to use Onion messages, basically the signal to nodes when you're online. I'm not aware of any other proposal to do it. This proposal, using Onion messages to signal onlineness, is cool and neat, but it's not clear to me that it's kind of like
looks like we lost Matt.
Yeah.
Vivek, I think there's actually just literally like one PR where people are discussing it, and it's very early days. And then also Breeze kind of tried to rewrite the original email where Matt proposed it, and they have a PR where they've kind of elaborated a little bit on his idea. But there's like one working PR where people have discussed it a little bit otherwise. But I think it's like Matt was saying, it's just very early idea, and other things are getting worked on first. But there's a lot of interest in seeing it progress.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a Optech link, and I believe his dev mailing list post, but I was just curious. Thanks, John.
Yeah, Twitter really should not have an option to press leave where you instantly leave mid-sentence if you mistap your phone. That should not be an option. So sorry about that. But yeah, there's not much there. I think Onion messages needs to be broadly deployed first, and then people will go back to spending more time working on it. But currently, it's kind of just here's an idea of how we could do this once we have all the other pieces in place.
All right. Well, I think we're going to end it here. I just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to come here today. It's really important to me and hopefully useful to all the listeners to have, resources like you guys that are willing to speak candidly about the technology and educate everybody about, how Lightning actually works and what it can and can't do. And I think this makes Bitcoiners look a lot better than shitcoiners by being, candid and honest with ourselves about the tech. So I really appreciate that you all came together to be here today. Each of you, if you want to, close out, let people know how they can reach you and where they can learn more about your projects.
All right, I'll start. People can reach me on Twitter or GitHub, and you can find our project under the GitHub ACINQ organization.
So I'm on Twitter, of course, and almost everywhere else I'm CDecker. And the project for Core Lightning is under github.com/elementsproject/lightning. And we have a couple of support channels as well, that are really active. So feel free to join them, and I'll see you online, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm much less on Twitter these days, spending time actually working instead. But if you want to add Lightning to your existing or new Bitcoin wallet, check out lightningdevkit.org and join our Discord. We're happy to answer any questions. So yeah.
Once again, thank you all so much, and thank you all for listening. And see you guys again next month for the next Synonym Spaces. We'll announce the topic later. But everybody have a great weekend.
Thanks, John. It was great.
Thanks.
Thanks, John.